Good evening, visitors. Welcome to the Australian War Memorial's Last Post ceremony. My name is Robert Adams, and joining us today from the Royal Australian Air Force is Squadron Leader Rebecca Pentreath. This evening we commemorate the 3rd Light Horse Brigade's charge at the Neck, part of the wider breakout actions by Commonwealth forces during the August offensive on Gallipoli. After months of stalemate, Australian, New Zealand, British and Indian troops attempted to break the deadlock on the peninsula by launching a series of assaults against Turkish strongpoints. The battles that followed were the largest and most costly of the Gallipoli campaign. They ended in heartbreaking failure and produced heavy losses on both sides. Many sites of the bloody struggle, Lone Pine, the Neck, Chinook Bear and Hill 60 became familiar names in Australia and New Zealand. The charge at the Neck led to more than 370 casualties, with more than 200 killed. Shortly, we will hear the story of Trooper Morton Alfred Cakebread, who was among those killed in action on the 7th of August 1915. This evening, we're honoured to acknowledge His Excellency Becca Diwali, Ambassador Extraordinary and Plenipotentiary of Georgia to the Commonwealth of Australia, and the accompanying delegation. We warmly welcome Mr. Patrick Delgaitis, Deputy President of the Returned and Services League of Australia, ACT branch, and members of one recruit training unit from the Royal Australian Air Force Base in Wagga Wagga, New South Wales, and trainees from the Australian Army School of Infantry. As always, we welcome the veterans who have served, those that are still serving, and the families that love and support them. The live stream of this ceremony is made possible by the Returned and Services League of Australia and the RSL and Services Clubs Association. We welcome members who are watching the broadcast of this ceremony across Australia. During this evening's ceremony, wreaths will be laid at the base of the pool of reflection by visitors to the memorial and students on behalf of Windsor State School visiting from Windsor in Queensland. Australia's Federation Guard is the tri-service ceremonial unit of the Australian Defence Force. They provide a ceremonial presence at civil and military events and during visits to Australia by foreign dignitaries. The Guard will now dismount the catafalque party from the tomb of the unknown Australian soldier. If you're able, I now invite you to please stand and join in singing the national anthem.
Beautiful party, attention! Beautiful party, present arms! Australians, oh let us rejoice, for we are one and free. With golden soil and wealth for toil, our home is got by sea. Our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty, rich and rare. In history's page, let every stage advance Australia fair. In joyful strains, then let us sing, advance Australia fair. Beautiful party, shoulder arms. Beautiful party, shoulder arms.
For visitors requiring a seat, you may now be seated. The Australian War Memorial was the vision of Charles Bean, Australia's First World War official historian. Bean landed with the Australian troops on Gallipoli and stayed with them at the front through to the end of the war. The idea of this national memorial and museum came to him at Pozières, France, in the depths of the bloody fighting of 1916. Bean's idea was that this would be a place where families and friends could mourn loved ones buried in faraway places. It would also be a place that could help all Australians to understand what these men and women had endured and what they had done for us. Bean's vision, to which we remain true, is best expressed as inscribed in the entrance to the memorial's galleries. Here is their spirit in the heart of the land they loved, and here we guard the record which they themselves made. Tonight we'll read the story behind just one of those on the Roll of Honour, which lists the names of more than 103,000 men and women who have given their lives for us in war and on operations over more than a century. But first we present a lament, Flowers of the Forest. Wreaths or floral tributes will now be laid at the base of the pool of reflection.
Today, we remember and pay tribute to Trooper Morton Alfred Cakebread. Morton Cakebread was born in 1895 in the Melbourne suburb of Coburg in Victoria. He was the second eldest of 5 children, born to Alexander Cakebread, a mechanic, and his wife Ada. Morton received his education at Elsternwick State School, where he was an active member of the cadets. On completion of his schooling, Morton took up work at Illawarra Station in Hay, New South Wales. He was a boundary rider there when the First World War broke out. In 1915, Morton returned to Victoria to enlist in the Australian Imperial Force. He joined on the 10th of February and was allocated to B Squadron of the 8th Light Horse with the rank of Trooper. After a very short period of training, Trooper Cakebread embarked for active service, sailing out of Melbourne just 2 weeks later on the troop ship Star of Victoria. When Cakebread arrived in Egypt, Allied forces were preparing for an attack on the Dardanelles. As light horse units were considered unsuitable for the initial operations there, Cakebread and his comrades spent time training and assisting with logistical tasks as Allied forces began landing on Gallipoli. In May 1915, Cakebread's unit embarked for Gallipoli without their horses. They landed at Anzac Cove and took up positions in the front line. For the first few weeks, the men of the 8th Light Horse were involved in defensive actions to hold the ground that had been won at enormous cost. By this stage, however, fighting on Gallipoli had descended into a stalemate. Allied forces launched a major offensive designed to take control of the high ground to the north and inland of Anzac Cove. It was believed that this would allow Allied troops to move across the peninsula, cutting Turkish forces in half. A series of feigns were organised to distract and divert the Turkish troops from the main attack. The charge at the Neck, the narrow bridge of land that stretched across Monash Valley between Russell's Top and Baby 700, was one such planned distraction. In the early hours of the 7th of August 1915, the men of the 8th Light Horse Regiment waited for the artillery bombardment that was intended to neutralise the Turkish machine guns opposite. At 4 a.m, a naval destroyer opened fire on the Neck, but although it fired for half an hour, it made little effect on Turkish troops and defences. The Allied bombardment ended 7 minutes early, and rather than attacking immediately, the men were ordered not to charge until the appointed time of the attack. The Turkish troops, who had taken shelter during the bombardment, used this time to man their positions, readying themselves for an attack they knew would come. The resulting battle was a disaster. Waves of men were cut down by machine gun and rifle fire as they attempted to reach enemy trenches. Major John Antill, who was in command of the 3rd Light Horse Brigade, rejected an initial proposal to call off the attack. By the time the cancellation was again suggested, a 4th line of men had mistakenly charged, meeting with murderous machine gun fire. The 10th Light Horse alone suffered more than 160 casualties. Among the dead was Trooper Morton Cakebread. His final resting place was never discovered. After receiving news of his death, Cakebread's family paid tribute to him with a short poem placed in the Melbourne Age. It read, "A hero he lived, a hero he died. Though only a lad, he fought for his side. His young life he gave for cause so true, fighting for his country, for me and for you. Trooper Morton Cakebread was just 20 years old. His name is listed on the Roll of Honour on my right, among almost 62,000 Australians who died while serving in the First World War. His photograph is displayed here today by the Pool of Reflection. This is but one of the many stories of service and sacrifice told here at the Australian War Memorial. We now remember Trooper Morton Alfred Cakebread, who gave his life for us, for our freedoms, and in the hope of a better world.
If you're able,
Party, shoulder, arms.
now invite you to please stand for the reading of the ode and the sounding of the last post.
They shall grow not old, as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
We'll remember them.
Careful, party. Raise in. Arms. Careful, party. Shoulder, arms.
Lest we forget.
Lest we forget.
Careful, party. Hours. 10. Careful, party. One. March.
We leave you this evening with the words of the memorial's founder, Charles Bean. Many a man lying out there at Pozières or in the low scrub at Gallipoli, with his poor, tired senses barely working through the fever of his brain, has thought in his last moments, well, it's over. But in Australia, they will be proud of this. Ladies and gentlemen, girls and boys, that concludes the last post ceremony. On behalf of the Director, staff and volunteers, we thank you for visiting the Australian War Memorial today and for your continued support during the Memorial's development project. We wish you all a very pleasant evening. Thank you.